Now, researchers believe they've discovered the origins of the Black Death more than 600 years.
For centuries, the Black Death has stood as one of the most devastating biological catastrophes in human history. In the middle of the 14th century, an invisible killer swept across continents with astonishing speed, collapsing entire communities, emptying cities, and reshaping economies, politics, and belief systems. Between 1347 and 1353, an estimated 50 to 60% of Europe's population perished. Entire family lines disappeared, labor systems collapsed, religious authority was shaken. Fear became a daily condition of life, yet for more than 600 years, one fundamental question remained unanswered. Where did it begin? Historians trace the plague's arrival into Europe through Mediterranean ports. Chroniclers described infected ships arriving in Sicily, Genoa, and Venice. They documented mass graves, overflowing hospitals, and desperate attempts to quarantine the sick. But these accounts only revealed where the disease appeared, not where it originated. The true source of the Black Death remained one of history's most persistent mysteries. The answer did not emerge from medieval manuscripts or European burial grounds. It came instead from a forgotten cemetery in the mountains of Central Asia and from the ability of modern science to read genetic evidence preserved inside human teeth for more than 6 centuries. The story begins in the summer of 1886. A Russian archaeological team was conducting excavations near the northern shore of Lake Issyk-Kul in what is now Kyrgyzstan. The region sat along a branch of the Silk Road, once home to a small Nestorian Christian trading community. The archaeologists uncovered dozens of stone-marked graves dated to the years 1338 and 1339, nearly a decade before the Black Death was first recorded in Europe. Among the gravestones was an inscription written in Syriac. It read simply, "This is the tomb of the believer San Mak. He died of pestilence." At the time, the word pestilence was a vague term. Medieval communities used it to describe any deadly outbreak. The archaeologists recorded the inscription, cataloged the remains, and transported the skeletal material to museum storage in St. Petersburg. With no immediate way to determine what disease had caused the deaths, the discovery faded into obscurity. For more than a century, the evidence sat largely untouched. In recent years, medieval historian Philip Slavin at the University of Stirling revisited the original excavation records while studying economic and environmental patterns surrounding the Black Death. What caught his attention was not a single gravestone, it was the scale of mortality. Between 1338 and 1339, more than 118 individuals from this small settlement were buried within just 2 years. Many of the gravestones explicitly mentioned pestilence. This was not a normal death rate, it was a localized mortality crisis. The timing was equally striking. These deaths occurred almost exactly a decade before the plague erupted in Europe. Slavin became convinced that this cemetery represented the earliest known outbreak of the same pandemic that would later devastate the West. But historical reasoning alone could not prove it. To confirm the connection, biological evidence was required. That evidence could only come from DNA. Slavin presented his findings to paleogeneticists at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. Their team had already been constructing a massive genetic family tree of the bacterium responsible for plague, Yersinia pestis. Using more than 1,300 samples drawn from both ancient remains and modern reservoirs across Eurasia, they had identified a critical pattern. In the early 14th century, Yersinia pestis underwent a rapid evolutionary expansion. From a single ancestral strain, 4 major lineages suddenly emerged. One of those lineages gave rise to the Black Death and every subsequent European outbreak for the next 400 years. What remained unknown was where that ancestral strain had existed. Genetic comparisons showed that the European plague samples were already slightly mutated. That meant Europe was not the point of origin. The original strain had to be somewhere else. The Kyrgyzstan cemetery offered a rare opportunity. Working with Russian researchers at the museum, where the remains had been stored since the 19th century, the team extracted DNA from the teeth of 7 individuals buried at the site. Teeth are ideal for ancient DNA preservation because the pulp cavity can trap bloodborne pathogens for centuries. The results were definitive. In 3 of the 7 individuals, researchers detected the unmistakable genetic signature of Yersinia pestis. The people buried in 1338 had died of plague, but the discovery did not stop there. When the full genome of the ancient bacterium was sequenced and compared against the global plague family tree, it matched the exact ancestral position from which the 4 major plague lineages emerged. This strain was not merely related to the Black Death, it was the mother strain. The origin point of the pandemic had finally been identified. Ground zero was not Europe, it was a small trading settlement near Lake Issyk-Kul in Central Asia. With the location confirmed, scientists turned to the next question. How did this bacterium suddenly jump from animals into humans with such catastrophic consequences? The region surrounding Lake Issyk-Kul is a natural plague reservoir. Even today, Yersinia pestis circulates continuously among wild rodent populations, including marmots, gerbils, and voles. These animals host fleas that carry the bacterium without wiping out the population. Under normal conditions, the disease remains contained within wildlife. Researchers propose that a climatic shift may have disrupted that balance. Warmer and wetter conditions could have increased vegetation growth, triggering a surge in rodent populations. More rodents meant more fleas and more opportunities for cross-species transmission. A single infected marmot hunted for meat or fur may have served as the bridge between wildlife and humans. Once the bacterium entered the trading settlement, close living conditions and flea transmission allowed it to spread rapidly. The final piece of the puzzle was how this localized outbreak traveled more than 3,500 kilometers to reach Europe. The graves themselves provided clues. Many of the individuals buried at the Kyrgyz site were interred with goods from distant regions, pearls from the Indian Ocean, coins from Iran, and trade items from across the Mediterranean. These were not isolated villagers. They were active participants in long-distance commerce along the Silk Road. Caravans transporting goods also transported rats. Fleas traveled with both. As traders moved westward, the infection moved with them, spreading slowly but steadily across Central Asia. By the mid-1340s, the disease reached the Crimean Peninsula and the port city of Kaffa. Historical accounts describe a siege in which Mongol forces reportedly catapulted the bodies of plague victims over the city walls, an early example of biological warfare. From Kaffa, Genoese merchant ships carried infected rats and fleas into the Mediterranean. Europe was uniquely vulnerable. Urban sanitation was poor, rat populations were exploding, homes were crowded, food storage was unsecured, and flea infestations were common. Once the bacterium arrived, it spread with devastating efficiency. Within 6 years, tens of millions of people were dead. What makes this discovery so significant is not only that it identifies the geographic origin of the Black Death, but that it demonstrates how interconnected the medieval world already was. A microscopic organism emerging in a remote mountain community traveled along trade routes that linked Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, reshaping civilization in its wake. It also underscores the importance of combining historical records with modern genetic science. Without the gravestone inscription recorded in 1886, the site might never have drawn attention. Without DNA sequencing, the hypothesis could never have been proven. A forgotten cemetery became the key to one of history's greatest mysteries. The Black Death was not born in European ports or medieval slums. It began quietly in the highlands of Central Asia, in a trading settlement whose people left behind little more than stone markers and bones. It also underscores the importance of combining historical records with modern genetic science. Without the gravestone inscription recorded in 1886, the site might never have drawn attention. Without DNA sequencing, the hypothesis could never have been proven. A forgotten cemetery became the key to one of history's greatest mysteries. The Black Death was not born in European ports or medieval slums. It began quietly in the highlands of Central Asia, in a trading settlement whose people left behind little more than stone markers and bones. From that small origin point, the pandemic reshaped the demographic, economic, and political trajectory of the entire Western world. The discovery reminds us that global events often begin far from the places where their consequences are felt most intensely. and that the past still holds answers waiting to be uncovered by the right combination of patience, technology, and evidence.